You are drowning in velvet. The air in the chamber is stagnant, heated to a suffocating fever pitch by the breath of too many people packed into one small room. It smells of melted beeswax, heavy musk, and the nervous sweat of a dozen strangers. You are lying on the bed, but you are not resting. You are waiting. You look up, desperate for a shadow to hide in, but the heavy curtains have been tied back with ruthless precision. There is nowhere to look but at them. They are standing at the foot of the bed. The archbishop, adjusting his golden stole, looks at you with the clinical detachment of a butcher inspecting a cut of meat. The Queen Mother, her face a mask of iron, waits to ensure the transaction is completed. The courtiers press closer, their eyes wide and hungry in the flickering candlelight. This is not a moment of intimacy. It is a spectator sport. You are expected to perform. The door is unbarred. The silence is deafening, broken only by the rustle of silk and the scratching of a scribe's quill. Your partner lies beside you, frozen, a pawn on the same chessboard. The terror here is not physical. It is the absolute annihilation of your dignity. If you fail to perform under this crushing scrutiny, the alliance shatters. If you cannot do your duty while the court watches, the peace treaty dissolves. The entire weight of the kingdom is pressing down on this mattress, and the eyes of the state are waiting for you to move. We have been fed a diet of Hollywood romance. The prince kisses the bride, the heavy oak doors swing shut, and the couple fades to black in the safety of a secluded tower. But in the ruthless corridors of historical power, silence was dangerous. Silence meant doubt. The bedding ceremony was not a perversion born of boredom. It was a cold, hard legal necessity. In the eyes of the church and the state, a royal marriage was a massive geopolitical contract involving dowries, territories, and armies. Yet, that contract remained unsigned until the physical union occurred. It was a matter of evidence. Without credible witnesses to verify the event, a rival nation could claim the marriage never happened. The alliance could be annulled before breakfast, and the war could resume by lunch. This wasn't the eccentricity of a single mad tyrant. It was the standard operating procedure for Europe's elite. From the frigid chambers of William of Orange to the gold-gilded court of Louis XIV, the ritual was identical. Even Catherine de' Medici, a master of political maneuvering, had to submit the intimate lives of her children to public verification. The modern mind craves privacy. The royal mind feared it. To them, privacy was suspicious. The bed was not a sanctuary for lovers. It was a stage for the state. The publicity was the entire point. To understand the horror, you must understand the philosophy that justified it. In the medieval and early modern mind, a monarch did not possess a private life because they did not possess a private body. Legal theory dictated that the king had two bodies: the mortal body, which aged and died, and the body politic, which was the state itself, immortal and invisible. Therefore, the king's physical act of reproduction was not a personal joy. It was a function of government. It was an act of legislation. The obsession with witnessing the act stemmed from a profound, stabilizing fear, the fear of the annulment. History was littered with broken treaties and civil wars caused by marriages that were declared invalid later. Henry VIII tore the world apart, looking for a valid heir. If a marriage wasn't finalized, it was legally void. If it was void, the peace treaty was just paper, and the armies on the border would begin to march. This paranoia began long before the wedding night. The inspection was the first humiliation. Ambassadors and matrons would often physically assess the bride, and occasionally the groom, to ensure they were functionally capable of breeding. These were cold, invasive medical examinations masquerading as diplomacy. They poked, prodded, and assessed the young royals like livestock at a county fair, checking for hips wide enough for duty or signs of weakness. Once the suitability was confirmed and the vows were spoken, the nightmare moved to the hallway. The journey from the altar to the bedroom was known as the procession. It was not a quiet retreat. It was a riotous, crowded parade. Musicians blasted horns, drums beat a frantic rhythm, and the entire court followed the couple up the stairs. They shouted ribald jests at the terrified teenagers, stripping away any last shred of romance. At the door of the chamber, the mood shifted from raucous to ritualistic. The clergy were waiting. In a supreme irony, the bishop would step forward not to protect the couple's modesty, but to bless the bed. Holy water was sprinkled on the sheets and pillows, sanctifying the very stage where the couple's dignity was about to be sacrificed for the good of the realm. The door closed on the public, but the privacy did not begin. The chamber itself became a theater of ritual, governed by a script as rigid as a coronation. First came the undressing. This was not an act of intimacy. It was a systematic dismantling. The bride did not remove her own clothes. She stood like a mannequin while her ladies-in-waiting peeled away the layers of damask, linen, and whalebone. Across the room, the groom was similarly stripped by his lords. With every layer removed, their individuality was stripped away until only the biological assets remained. They were no longer people. They were raw materials for the dynasty. Then came the chalice. Before the couple was allowed to lie down, the archbishop or a high-ranking courtier would present the posset. This was a thick, hot sludge of curdled milk, heavy wine, and aggressive spices like nutmeg and cinnamon. It was designed to be rich, cloying, and potent. Ostensibly, it was a toast to their health. In reality, it was a mandatory dose of liquid courage, a primitive stimulant forced down the throats of two people trembling with nerves. The taste was heavy, metallic, and suffocatingly sweet, a final sacramental drug to ensure the night's work would be completed. But the crowd did not disperse. They encroached. In a tradition that defies modern comprehension, the stocking throw began. The guests, drunk on wine and power, would sit on the very edge of the marriage bed. They removed the couple's stockings and flung them over their shoulders, aiming to hit the bride or groom. It was a chaotic, rowdy game played in the most vulnerable space imaginable. The air was filled with laughter and bets, creating a carnival atmosphere around two terrified teenagers huddling under the covers. Finally, the signal was given. The heavy velvet curtains around the four-poster bed were drawn. But this was not for silence. It was merely a visual barrier. In many courts, the guests would simply retreat to the doorway or the antechamber, leaving the door ajar to listen for the confirmation. The curtains muffled the sight, but the state kept its ears open, waiting for the morning light to reveal the final piece of evidence. The stained sheet. The only receipt that mattered. Strip away the gold leaf, the fanfares, and the high-sounding titles, and look at the people trembling in the center of the room. Often, they were not adults. They were barely teenagers. We frequently forget the terrifying arithmetic of royal alliances. Brides and grooms were commonly 12, 13 or 14 years old. They were pawns pushed across a map by fathers they barely knew, forced into a bed with a stranger who spoke a different language. The psychological pressure cooker this created was catastrophic. For the young groom, the weight of the crown was suddenly located entirely in his biology. If he could not perform on command, he wasn't just an awkward teenager. He was a failure of the state. His inability became a matter of public debate, whispered about in the stables and laughed about in the taverns. For the bride, the terror was more visceral. She had been raised on stories of mothers dying in the birthing bed, a fate that claimed queens as often as peasants. This ritual was not just the loss of her innocence, it was the beginning of a physical duty that might cost her life. There is no starker example of this torture than the marriage of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. They were 15 and 14 years old. When the night came, nothing happened, and nothing happened for 7 agonizing years. In a private life, this would be a difficult struggle. In the French court, it was a national scandal. The delay wasn't handled with empathy. It was monetized by their enemies. Pamphlets were printed and distributed in the streets of Paris, mocking the king's inability to function as a man. The entire nation was invited to speculate on the mechanics of their bedroom, turning their private shame into political ammunition that eventually helped fuel a revolution. But for those who did succeed, the morning brought the final indignity. In the cold light of day, the chamber doors would open, not for breakfast, but for the inspection. Ambassadors, grown men representing foreign powers, would march in to examine the bed linens. They were looking for the receipt of the transaction. In the case of Catherine of Aragon or the young Louis XIV, the sheets were sometimes displayed or visually verified. A young girl's ordeal was reduced to a single crimson mark on a piece of linen, held up as proof that the contract was sealed. Her body was no longer hers. It was a verified asset of the crown. You are Mary Stuart. You are 15 years old, and you have been crying for 2 days straight. Your eyes are swollen, your face is blotchy, and you are trembling in your shift. You are not looking at your husband with love. You are looking at him with dread. He is William of Orange, your cousin. He is 12 years your senior, 4 inches shorter than you, asthmatic, and cold as a Dutch winter. He stands on the other side of the bed, looking at you not as a wife, but as a political necessity he wishes to be done with. But the horror isn't just the man, it's the audience. Standing right beside the bed is the King of England, your uncle, Charles II. He is not offering you comfort. He is drunk on power, treating your terror as the evening's entertainment. The room is filled with courtiers, but Charles is the ringmaster. You climb into the high bed, wishing the mattress would swallow you whole. The laughter in the room is sharp and cruel. You pull the covers up to your chin, trying to build a wall between your body and the dozens of eyes fixed upon it. But your uncle will not let you hide. Charles II steps forward, grabbing the heavy velvet curtains himself. He looks at William, then at you, and bellows a command that echoes off the walls. Now, nephew, to your work, St. George for England. He snaps the curtain shut with a flourish. The darkness encloses you, but the sound doesn't stop. You can still hear the muffled laughter of the king and his court on the other side of the velvet. You are not a princess tonight. To them, you are livestock. You are a vessel for the Protestant line, and your tears are just a footnote in the history books they are writing while you lie there, praying for silence. One day you will be queen, but tonight you are just a girl who wants to go home. As the candles burned down on the 17th century, a slow but unstoppable shift began to take hold of the European mind. The Enlightenment didn't just bring science and philosophy, it brought a radical new invention, the concept of privacy. Slowly, the two bodies of the king began to merge. The bedroom doors were shut, the crowds were pushed back to the antechamber, then to the hallway, and finally, out of the palace wing entirely. By the time the Victorian era arrived, the very idea of the bedding ceremony had become repulsive. Queen Victoria, the matriarch of a new moral code, would have viewed the rituals of her ancestors with absolute horror. Under her reign, the royal bedroom was transformed from a public stage into the ultimate domestic sanctuary. But the damage of the old ways had already been done. We often look at history's mad kings and cruel queens and wonder why they were so detached, so cold. We forget that many of them were forged in these moments of profound trauma. They were taught from their wedding night that their bodies were not their own, and that vulnerability was a weakness to be exploited by a watching crowd. Yet, the ghost of the bedding ceremony has never truly left us. The courtiers no longer stand at the foot of the bed with candles, but the hunger to witness the private body of the public figure remains voracious. We have traded the velvet curtains for telephoto lenses. The paparazzi culture that hounded Princess Diana and scrutinizes modern royals is the direct descendant of the cheering crowds in the bedchamber. We tell ourselves we are more civilized because we do not stand in the room, but we still demand the right to see. We still believe, deep down, that the king or the celebrity has no right to close the door. In the end, the bedding ceremony serves as a brutal reminder of the true cost of monarchy. We look back at the oil paintings, the velvet robes, and the glittering jewels, and we see power. But if you look closer at the terrified eyes of the teenagers beneath the sheets, you see the truth. They were not the masters of the kingdom. They were its prisoners. This ritual was never really about intimacy. It was a demonstration of absolute ownership. It was the state declaring that a king or queen owns nothing, not their time, not their choices, and not even their own skin. Every breath, every heartbeat, and every intimate moment was merely currency to be spent for the survival of the regime. We often envy the royals for their palaces and their prestige. We imagine the fairy tale, but ask yourself, would you take the crown if it meant you could never again close the door? Would you accept the worship of millions if it meant the world was allowed to watch you in the dark? Freedom is not found on a throne. It is found in the silence of a locked room. If you are grateful that you can bar your door tonight, like this video, and for more history that the textbooks are afraid to touch, subscribe to the Scarlet Archives. We'll be waiting for you in the dark.